Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue our discussion of object-oriented programming by looking at another property of it known as encapsulation. We already talked about abstraction in the previous video, but an equally important property of object-oriented is encapsulation. The definition of it is hiding implementation details from clients. Now, abstraction didn't exactly hide everything, because you could still access member variables when you were in main. Encapsulation actually restricts access of certain elements of the class. So we're going to be using encapsulation from this point forward. Typically in object-oriented programming, we'll want to restrict access to the class variables in main. That means main, we do not want main to access the class variables directly. We do, however, want main to access member methods directly. So the way you restrict access to something in a class is you put this keyword in front of it, namely the keyword private. So you just type this keyword private in front of your class variables. This is typically what is done in object-oriented programming. Variables, private. Methods or functions, public. And as you can see here in this class, I have created a class called Olympics, as you can see, and I have 4 member variables right here. But notice I've got the keyword private in front of all of them. This means I cannot access in main any of these, any of these variables directly. Let me say that again. Since I put the keyword private in front of my 4 class variables, that means my main program cannot access any of those variables directly. So how would you access them? Well, that is why programmers typically create get methods with variables. If you make all your variables private and you want to just look at the value of that variable in main, then you create a get method for that variable and make sure that get method is public, and main can call the get methods. We're not going to need get methods for this particular example. We have another way of displaying the values of these variables. So what this Olympics class is all about is it's going to take as its 4 variables a country that competed in Olympic Games. And we obviously have the number of gold medals the country won, the number of silver medals, and the number of bronze medals. So since I have 4 class variables, here is my constructor that I've just highlighted that has 4 parameters. 1 for the country, that's a string, and then the number of gold, silver, and bronze medals, those are all integers. I've also created a getTotal method, which just returns the sum of the gold, silver, and bronze medals, gives you back the total number of medals that country won. And there's also one more method I've created here. This is a method that can be defined for any class you create in Java, and it should have a familiar name. It's this one, toString. Remember when we used the arrays class and wanted just to display an array, and we used a toString method in the arrays class? Well, now we're defining our own toString method for any class we create. The toString method must be of type string, obviously, no parameters, and all it's going to do is return a string. So here I'm just going to return a sentence using the concatenator symbol, the plus sign, to create a sentence for how many gold, silver, and bronze medals the country won, and also to say how many total medals the country won. Now, that is the main definition of my Olympics class. Now, I do have a client program set up. I have a separate file called Chapter 8 Lab 2, and here's what I'm going to do with it. Let me explain what's going on. So what I've done here is I've created a one-dimensional array with this line. I have an array of type Olympics, which means this array will hold objects of the Olympics class. I'm calling the name of the array is Winter 2022, and it has 6 elements. I'm also going to create a scanner object that's associated with a file. The file's name is medals.txt, so I'm going to be reading data from a file. And here is the medals.txt file. So for each country, I have the name of the country, followed by the number of gold medals, silver medals, and bronze medals that country won. That means Norway in the 2022 Winter Olympics won 16 gold medals, 8 silver medals, and 13 bronze medals. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use line-based processing to process the data in that file. Okay. So in order to do that, I've got an index variable set to 0. Here's my while loop to read this data. So it says while file has next line. We're going to read a line of data, not just a token. We're going to read a line of data, and then, which I'm doing in this line, string line equals file.next line. So that reads that. That reads each line of the file. And then once that's done, then I create a second scanner object. I'm calling it S. And I associate that scanner object S with the line of data I just read. This is how line-based processing works from the second part of chapter 6. So now what I do is I read the data for each file. Remember, in the medals.txt file, for each line, it's the country first, followed by the number of golds, number of silvers, and number of bronzes. Okay. So that's where I'm reading everything. And so once I do that, so what you see circled is how I'm reading the data for each country into variables. And then once that is done, now I will create an object of the Olympics class using the country, gold, silver, and bronze variables, and I will put that object into my array. That's what this line is doing. It creates an object of the Olympics class using the data read from the file, and then it puts that object into my array that I created. And then, of course, once I'm done with that one, I have to increase my index variable by 1, so I fill up the whole array. And then once that is all finished, so when I get here, this is the end of my while loop. So I've read the data from the file. Now I'm going to display everything in my objects. But to do that, I'm going to use a for loop whose variable starts at 0 and goes up to, but not including the length of the array. And remember I said the toString function can be defined for any class? Well, all I'm doing is for each object that's in that array, I'm calling that object's toString method. And that will display the sentences for each object. And when you run this, bring up the box, okay. As you can see, Chapter 8, Lab 2 is getting stuff from the Olympics class, but that's where main is. So I'm going to run this. And as you can see here, there's my output. Norway won 16 gold medals, 8 silvers, and 13 bronze for a total of 37. And there are the rest of the countries. Once again, let's look at that toString method. Here's how the toString method was defined. And let's just look at the first sentence. All the rest of them are the same. It's displaying the country, gold, silver, bronze, and then the total. That's how you create a toString method in a class in Java. Now, one more thing. I created a separate file for my client program. And this is what you will typically do when you're writing real programs on a real job in Java. You'll have the definition of the class in one file, and you'll put main in a separate file so that you can test it out. But for our purposes, I will show you that it's also possible to not need that second file. Here I am in my Olympics class. I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but down below the toString method, look at this. Within the class, I've also put main right here. So this is another option. Once you define your class variables, your constructor, and all the methods in your class, you're still within the class definition, but you can put main in here too. And this code for main that you're looking at is the exact same code for main that was in the second file, the Chapter8Lab2 file. So if I want to just run that and not even bother with the second file, I can. I'll bring up the box once again. And this time, instead of right-clicking on Chapter8Lab2, I'll right-click on the Olympics file. And since there's a main in there, I'll run it. And lo and behold, the output is exactly the same. There it is. So what you're looking at here is the Olympics file, the olympics.java file. As you can see, I've defined my class. There are my 4 private variables. There's my constructor. There's a getTotal function. There's a toString function. Note, and then here's main. But notice, main is the only function to have the word static on it. None of the other functions have the word static. That means they are confined to the class. All right. You have to, in other words, to call the constructor, to call getTotal, and to call toString, you must use an object of the Olympics class to call them. But since main has the word static in front of it, you don't need that one. You don't need it. You don't need an object of the class to call main. It can just be called. For part 2 of the final exam, when you are given a programming problem to create an object of a class, I will want you to put everything, the class definition and main, into one file and submit that one file. That is why I am showing you this example of the Olympics class with main inside of it. If you have any questions, please send me an email at kmuldrow@lbcc.edu.